Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the third installment of our Masterclass in Mentoring webinar series. I am Hernan Paragas. I'm president of the Philippine Association for Communication and Media Research Incorporated, or PA-CMRI. Today's session is entitled Identifying Research Gaps as an Ethical Priority, and it explores how we can commit to identifying actual research gaps that are contributory to nation building and to the advancement of the discipline, and to treating this exercise as part of the larger national and disciplinal ethical framework. The Masterclass in Mentoring program is our flagship project to deepen the relationship between mentors and mentees by helping enrich their shared knowledge and appreciation of the foundation and ferments, as well as the discourses and debates about communication and media research. The webinar series goes beyond the textbook approach to the research process, as it expounds on the various philosophical, contextual, and practical concerns that inform and elevate the studies that we conduct. We at PA-CMRI hope that the series, by bonding mentors and mentees this way, results in a vibrant and rigorous communication and media research culture in our country. In our very first Masterclass in Mentoring webinar, Dr. Joyce Ariola of UST, Dr. Yum Demeterio of De La Salle University, Dr. Sandy Flor of the UP Open University, and myself talked about research excellence frameworks. In the second webinar, Dr. Jason Cabañas of the De La Salle University, Dr. Clarissa David of Ateneo, and Dr. Mayet Rivera of the Far Eastern University, and Dr. Wawi Lumiba of UP Diliman discussed the agenda and vantage points of doing research, especially of conceptualizing research. Today, we have Dr. Aris Arugay of the UP College of Social Sciences and Philosophy, Dr. Anjo Lorenzana of Ateneo de Manila University, and Dr. Randy J. Solis of UP Diliman as our resource persons. They are 15 of the best scholars in the country who have kindly agreed to serve pro bono in our masterclass series. There are many more who will be participating in our next 4 webinars. As I have said before, they are our Avengers seeking to defend and uphold the research productivity and rigor in the Philippines. As I've said, there are 4 more webinars stretching all the way to November, and I hope you can join us. Whether during our live event right now or asynchronously via the videos that we archive in the PA-CMRI Facebook page. And then from December 2 to 4, we will have our very first Masterclass in Mentoring workshop that we are opening for academic unit heads, research coordinators, and research faculty members. Please send us an email at pacmrinc@gmail.com if you are interested to be part of that intense workshop where we will revisit the webinars and find ways of moving forward towards truly creating a community of communication and media scholars. Ayan. So padayon sa ating lahat ha. Now, let's start with the house rules. Before we get started with the webinar, some ground rules. So this event is being recorded for uploading in Facebook later tonight. Kindly mute your video and audio and use the speaker view. Kindly use your full name as your screen name to verify your attendance for the certificate. And to pose a question or comment, type your question in the chat box. You may also raise your hand to be acknowledged. And once called, kindly unmute and turn your video on to give your question or comment. Certificates will be issued to participants who complete the evaluation form on or before 11:59 tonight, September 7, 2022. But kailangan buuin ninyo ha, yung lahat ng 7. So you may be doing this asynchronously, but please answer all of the evaluation forms. A gentle reminder lang that we are operating through a trust system, and I sincerely hope you do truly engage our webinars before accomplishing the evaluation forms, which are our basis for issuing you a certificate at the end of the webinar series. Make the certificate you will receive from us meaningful because you can say that you did learn from our webinars. Now, without further ado, let me turn over the floor to Dr. Randy J. C. Solis, PA-CMRI Vice President and the Department of Communication Research Chair here at the UP College of Mass Communication, who will serve as our resource person and moderator today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Hernan. Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you again to everyone here for joining us in this masterclass. And speaking of masterclass, I am really honored to join our two other colleagues here, Dr. Anjo Lorenzana and Dr. Aris Arugay. Thank you very much, the two of you, for agreeing to share your expertise and your experience with us. I'm very excited. I'm looking forward to what we have to impart and also at the same time to partake with our audience and participants this afternoon. Our order of presentation was designed according to a framework. Diba? How very research, no? That we designed when we first met to discuss the program for this masterclass. So to start things off, we have our first speaker, Dr. Anjo Lorenzana. Jozon A. Lorenzana is associate professor and chair of the Department of Communication in the School of Social Sciences, Ateneo de Manila University. Dr. Lorenzana's research in media anthropology examines questions about how people's digital media practices relate to socio-cultural change and continuity. Their latest article, Queer Recognition and Politics on YouTube, the circulation of Filipino Miss Universe fans' reaction videos, is now published in the Asian Journal of Communication. Please welcome Dr. Anjo Lorenzana. Hi, Anjo.
Hello, Dr. Solis. Thank you so much for the introduction. Please allow me to share my slide. Okay. Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation to speak before esteemed colleagues from all over the country. As the first speaker, I was also tasked to introduce a framework to approach the topic, identifying research gaps as an ethical priority, which members of the panel, Dr. Solis and Dr. Arugay and I developed. PAC MRI advocates that the process of identifying research gaps has an ethical imperative. Research has to go beyond an individual scholar's and interests and contribute to both disciplinary and societal concerns. Our session expands and complicates this proposition. We will argue that personal, institutional, and societal considerations overlap and oftentimes work hand in hand in informing, shaping, and animating our individual and collective research endeavors. How we identify research and our research areas are complicated by disciplinary priorities and larger politics of local and global academia. Our panel's aim is not to suggest course of action, but to offer perspectives to help us recognize the dynamics and relationships of the personal, institutional, and societal dimensions in our research work. I begin by discussing the personal dimension that encompasses elements which constitute a scholar's being. Their socioeconomic background, ethnicity, sexuality, age, research interests, passions, experiences, habits, values, politics, abilities, limitations, and ambitions. The research interests and work of scholars are never divorced from their lived experiences and milieu. They draw from their own histories, current preoccupations, and future aspirations. We have a local term that captures a scholar's personal stake on their research: hugot, to pull. In an earlier paper, I conceptualized hugot as an intense feeling or sentiment rooted in the past. As a verb, humuhugot, the term refers to bringing up past experiences or expressing hidden sentiments. Researchers must have some hugot. We draw from experience, and our work is animated by some sentiment. Let me share two examples which illustrate how one's personal background and interests influence our research work and commitments. The case of British academics with a working class heritage makes a good demonstration of the ways personal struggles and passions open up vistas of knowledge, not just in the social sciences, but also in science and engineering. I use their examples because their stories are in the public domain and we don't run the risk of misrepresenting their narratives. A scholar whose work I consider very illuminating is Cambridge professor Diane Ray. Her work in the sociology of education interrogates social inequality and the emotional experience of class. In many interviews and papers, she describes the ways her early childhood has informed her research. I am quoting at length one interview from the podcast, The Sociology Show, and I quote, "I come from a socialist, trade unionist, working class background. I grew up in the South Derbyshire coalfields. That's the sort of big impact in the kind of sociology I do and the motivations for doing it. I get very, very vivid memories of my school and the negative aspects of it. There's not many things I remember as a sense of accomplishment or joy or positive vibes. It was very much a part of class struggle and had a difficult, stressful, anxiety-inducing time throughout my school. I always had a sense that I didn't really belong, that I was getting things wrong. And I think that made me the person I am. But it's also the reason why I'm also obsessed with education and issues around educational identity, but also about educational achievement, social mobility, working class failure, and also middle class educational success. There's always a stigmatizing of the working classes in education. And my experience exemplifies that. The moment I got into school, I was put in the bottom set, in the expectation that I was not a very clever child. I would not be able to cope with reading, and I had to fight to get out of that set. That is a conflict in itself. In struggling to be recognized in succeeding at education, you're actually leaving behind your working class peers. That is always a tension for me, and that comes out in my work. The tension between achieving educational success as a working class individual and what that means in terms of what you leave behind. End of quote. Diane Ray's story demonstrates how a personal struggle as a working class student indicates the broader social problems of class in British society. As our framework suggests, the personal is part and symptomatic of institutional and societal concerns. Each one of us is a product of a social milieu and historical condition. Thus, an individual scholar brings to the table a worldview, a perspective, and a social problem that cannot be ignored. A serious scholar's personal agenda can be of national, regional, and international concern. And here, the story of Professor Sarah Gilbert, designer of the Oxford COVID-19 vaccine, is significant. Her inclination towards an approach to research has led the way to the rapid development of a COVID-19 vaccine, thus saving millions of lives during the pandemic. Professor Gilbert's recollection of her time at university and graduate school in a BBC interview is instructive, and I quote, "University was great. I chose a course that was deliberately broad in biological sciences. It was a big department, lots of research going on there. I enjoyed it. The PhD, okay, there wasn't much interaction with other disciplines. That is something that I realized I really enjoyed, meaning interaction with other disciplines. Discoveries were made at the boundaries of the disciplines, whereas there are some scientists who will happily work with more or less on their own on one subject for a very long period of time, really do in-depth analysis of one thing. That's not the way I like to work. I like to try to take into account ideas from lots of different areas, technologies from different areas, and bring it all together. I was stubborn until the end and got a PhD out of it. End of quote. Professor Gilbert's stubborn preference for a holistic and syncretic approach to science was key to Oxford AstraZeneca's success. By also taking into account the scalability of making vaccines, the production of cheap, accessible, and effective COVID-19 vaccine in record time was possible. Decades ago, the sort of collaboration that we now see across disciplines was unpopular, but it takes the persistence of individuals for groundbreaking or life-saving ideas to come into fruition. As educational institutions mindlessly copy fashionable work practices and phrases from corporate capitalism, the story of Professor Gilbert is a reminder to preserve the nature of the university as a space to independently generate, cultivate, and test ideas. Our personal experiences are not entirely unique. The social sciences have demonstrated the common structures which condition our life worlds. Thus, a queer scholar may theorize the collective experience of suffering and social inequality of their group. As a queer scholar, coming from the periphery of provincial Philippines, my hugot, or research agenda, concerns the experience of ethnic, class, and gender structures and relations. I look at everyday social situations from the perspective of queer, conceptualized by Martin Manalansan IV as about messing things up, creating disorder and disruptive commotion within the normative arrangements of bodies, things, spaces, and institutions. Queer is also about the productive possibilities of people who are left out, displaced, or dispossessed because of their position within the landscapes of the normal. As a mode of analysis, queer, according to Manalansan, disrupts and unsettles the blissful tidiness of the normal. End of quote. Thus, from a queer perspective, I am excited to examine research problems such as the painful experiences of LGBTQI+ people to understand the ways they confront, subvert, and rework heteronormative structures in everyday life. In my recent article on Miss Universe reaction videos, I have argued that kabaklaan, the hysterical and dramatic expressions of the bakla, unsettles normative bourgeois values such as respectability and restraint. By interrogating a form of popular culture, we can critique society to be able to transform its unequal social order and norms. Needless to say, the university is home to competing, complementing, and conflicting personal research agenda. Diversity, I argue, is the norm. Okay. If we wish to produce knowledge that is in tune with and responsive to the broader society, A diverse academic department allows us to hear voices and see visions here and elsewhere. But how diversity in knowledge production is practiced is shaped by local institutional contexts and mandates, a theme which the next speaker will tackle. Thank you for your attention. May I now introduce the next speaker. Our next speaker is our moderator for today. Dr. Randy J. C. Solis is Associate Professor and Chair of the Department of Communication Research, University of the Philippines in Diliman. He obtained his PhD from the School of Journalism and Communication, from the Chinese University of Hong Kong. His research interests include new media, development and health communication, children and gender studies. His researches have been published in the International Journal of Communication, the Chinese Journal of Communication, MC Journal, Pilipinas, a Journal of Philippine Studies, and Plaridel, a Philippine Journal of Communication, Media, and Society. Please welcome our dear colleague, Dr. Randy Solis.
Thank you very much, Anjo, and for that very wonderful and eloquent presentation. Let me just share my slide for this part of this afternoon's program. So my task this afternoon, as Anjo earlier already explained, we formed this framework in terms of the different factors and influences when it comes to determining research gaps and also the subsequent research endeavors of our students. So I'm speaking to our administrators here and our research teachers, but also our students, because this is essentially a masterclass in terms of identifying research gaps and therefore also the topics that we pursue in terms of our research endeavors. So for this presentation, I draw a lot from my personal experience, having been a mentor to undergraduate and graduate students in UP and previously in Ateneo. Also, as a recent student, I just finished my graduate studies for my PhD. So a lot of what I'm going to share this afternoon are also based on what I learned from my mentors. So this is that framework, and Dr. Anjo has already discussed the idea of personal contexts, and this personal context, while we dissect them into three different sections this afternoon, we always emphasize the intersections of these three influences, of these three factors when it comes to identifying research gaps in our research. The personal context, a lot of what Dr. Anjo mentioned is that may sarili tayong hugot. We have a lot of experiences that we draw from when we do our research, because that is based on the natural tendency of people to start in terms of doing research with what is close to their hearts. And essentially, this is a valid starting point. It's also because if you look at the merits of emphasizing personal contexts and research interests, these are topics that our young researchers know and are interested in. And this is also the reason why they have the stamina and the longevity to be able to complete their research. Because for our students, particularly in the undergraduate programs, the way they see thesis is really just a requirement for them, the penultimate requirement for them to be able to obtain their degrees. And these are all valid reasons, and these are good starting points for us when we encourage our students to do their research. But let me complicate this scenario, the idea of research imagination based on your research personal interests and contexts, by looking at another influence that actually encapsulate or shelters our research imagination in the context of our personal interests and contexts. So a lot of what we do in terms of identifying research gaps are based on the literature that we read, no? And then we reflect this on to our personal interests and contexts. But a lot of our research endeavors are also predetermined or shaped, no, by structures and institutions wherein we operate. No? As students, you are still a member of an institution. As a research teacher, you're a member of your university. No? And you are a member of a discipline, communication, for in our case, communication research. So we are situated within structures and institutions that actually complicate, no, or color our research imagination, no, when it comes to doing our research. So let me now focus on this structure, the institutional mandates and agenda. So how are these manifested when it comes to research ideas and research endeavors of our students? When it comes to programs, for example, the Communication Research Department, we screen our students when it comes to their topics that they can pursue in their research based on focus topics, no, that is predetermined by the institution. For example, in communication research, our focus is mediatization or mediated communication. And so the topics that we encourage our students to pursue should fall within this institutional research agenda. Now, earlier, I just came from a class. No, this is my research design. This is a prelude to our thesis ComRes 200 class. And some of them are interested particularly in film, for example. And we have another program here in the College of Mass Communication, which is film. No? And so we try to encourage them to look into the mediated aspects or the messaging aspects of the films instead of theorizing film theories, no, in this case. So we always want to align our students with the agenda that we set, no, because we want to contribute to a particular disciplinal movement, no, in this case, the movement of mediatization and mediated communication. And I think I also mentioned this already in a previous session with PAC-MRI. The idea of institutional agenda also has something to do with your identity, no, as an institution, which is something I will also explain in the next slide. But another manifestation of institutional agenda is experience when we submit articles for journal publication, for example. When I recently had my PhD, almost all of my teachers would always say, okay, when you come up with a research article, always start with the journal that you want to publish in. No, start with the journal in mind, no, before you start writing your article, because that will determine the acceptance of your particular article. So for example, if you want to publish in my university's journal in the Chinese University of Hong Kong, is the Chinese Journal of Communication, which is one of the top journals in communication. A lot of those that we get submitted to that journal were actually from different countries, and they would come up with research about communication in their country, but it has nothing to do with China. No, and there is no external validity. It's only about, you know, descriptive data about their particular countries. And so it gets rejected, even if it's a valid research article. So as you may see, even if you have a valid research or a research idea, but there are also institutional filters for these publications and articles to get accepted. So as teachers, no, and as research administrators in our universities, we also have to bear in mind that when we tell our students to produce research, we also think of their eventual publication of their research journals. We also think of these filters of different institutions, particularly of journals. And also when we do our research work within our program, we also think of our research agenda that we outline for our students. Another institutional factor is that affects our research ideas and the research gaps that we pursue for our research is dependent on the identity or the positioning of a particular institution. Now, this is a little more fixed compared to the research agenda, because research agenda, sometimes you're able to change them periodically. No? But for example, if you belong to a university that is, for example, particular to agriculture, or it is about health sciences, then your communication research is expected to fill in the gaps in that particular field. I remember also in that last talk that I had with PACMRI, there was a participant who talked about their research agenda mainly being agricultural communication because their university is an agricultural university. So there are many other fields where communication attaches itself, no? Because we always see ourselves a communication as a program component. So it can be development communication, it can be health communication, and so therefore the research that you put out there and that you pursue must be aligned with that identity of the institution where you're coming from. Another manifestation of institutional filters, no, I call them, is that where you further submit your personal contexts and interests, are also institutional mandates, no? And these are what I term as institutional responses to calls of the times. So for example, during the national elections, there were a lot of calls for research on political communication or research on the elections, research on disinformation. Also during the pandemic, a lot of calls for research on disinformation. No? And this is these are clearly manifested in, for example, specialized grants to encourage research. So as administrators, for example, we encourage research based on these calls, no? What we term as the calls of the times. So for example, in UP now, we are encouraging a lot of activities about martial law, no? In celebration of the martial law. So we are calling for a lot of research for that. So this encourages researchers, you know, these calls for grants, these calls for even for, like, for example, special issues in journals. You know, so this encourages research on those specific areas because these are mandated, you know, by the institutions as a response to what they feel are relevant or important during that particular period. Another manifestation is there are also what we call institutional tendencies and biases. Now, this is a little harder to decipher because it's supposed to be invisible. No, it's not palpable. It's not very clear. It's only manifested invisibly. No, and these are usually determined by organizational culture, historical context, and even personalities. No, these determine what is acceptable research, no? Whether it be for publication, whether it be for conference presentation. So I remember my teacher in PhD when he taught quantitative research, Professor Louis Lung, no? The first day of class, he presented a content analysis he did, no, of accepted papers by AEJMC, no? This is one of the top tier conferences in communication. And he showed us the percent of the acceptance rate of different topics of communication research according to the divisions of AEJMC and according to the special topics that they consider. No? And for example, the one that he presented was from 2013 and 2014. In 2013, the top acceptance rate was for research on magazines, which is a division in AEJMC. But in 2014, significantly, it reduced its popularity, and a lot of the accepted papers came from the electronic news division. So if you take a look at this more deeply, who determines what gets accepted? And this is quite volatile because it depends on the committee memberships, no? And the committee memberships is quite arbitrary. So the people that you invite for the committees may be more biased towards particular topics, and therefore research that are accepted for particular conferences are skewed towards the interests of those members in a particular committee. Now, these are things that we don't normally consider when we explore research ideas and research endeavors, but they definitely impede on or encourage our research endeavors as they are being predetermined or set by a few number of people, if you might say. So this leads us to the idea of interrogating power in this wider structure of research imagination. So it's true that we can always come from personal contexts and personal agenda, personal passions, but they may also be tempered, filtered or encouraged by institutional agenda. And therefore, there are what we call inclusions and also at the same time exclusions. So this is what we need to interrogate and to question and to reflect on. So institutional filters when it comes to inclusions also serve a purpose, because according to Thomas Kuhn, in his book on Structure of Scientific Revolutions, theories and paradigms, particularly movements in research paradigms, are actually formed when there is what we call enough movements or massive involvement when it comes to popularizing research paradigms. So for example, in the 90s, mass media effects as a paradigm was probably the most popular amongst all of these research paradigms. But when you move towards the latter part of the 1990s, towards the 2000s, where Melvin DeFleur's article on the decline in theoretical productivity, where he actually interrogated the decline of theorization in mass media effects, he noticed that there is already what we call a pluralization of research projects and movements. So there is exclusion, but this exclusion is not exactly a bad thing, because when you get excluded in some movements, in some research paradigms, you are actually encouraged to develop your own research movements and research projects, and therefore progress even into becoming your own research paradigms. So these inclusions and exclusions, whilst they also have their own sets of drawbacks, they also have their own sets of benefits. When you get excluded, you can look elsewhere. For example, if you get excluded in particular conferences, I hear from colleagues both when I was doing my PhD and even as I go back to teaching now, a lot of my colleagues would say, we won't be able to publish in AEJMC, for example, or maybe ICA because they prioritize positivist research or quantitative research. If that's the case, then we shouldn't be discouraged because there are other conferences that also encourage cultural research. For example, ating conference na attend ko, I forgot the acronym, but it prioritizes cultural research or critical research. So exclusions is not exactly a bad thing. It's just telling you to look elsewhere, and not to discourage your research ideas altogether. Inclusions also serve, it's not always a negative thing. It's not only an in-group thing, but it is also needed in terms of developing research paradigms. So the main thing that we need to think about as research administrators and teachers is really to question this power structure. Who determined the research gaps? And how do you position yourself in that structure? So what I'm saying is that if you get excluded in some areas, you will get included in some other areas. And the idea there is just to have this awareness of this structure, wherein we operate, wherein our research ideas are tempered and are shaped and are filtered and or encouraged. So I end with a personal experience just to emphasize the idea that the personal intersects with the institutional, and later on Dr. Aris will talk about the social and the wider structure, the societal structure. By talking about my personal interest. And one example of this is my interest in children's research. I previously worked for UNICEF, and even before that, I grew up reading, UNICEF textbooks and greeting cards, and I was really interested in working for for an NGO, an international organization for children. No? And so I brought that personal context when I started doing my research. No? And when I joined the Department of Communication Research, for example, that interest encouraged me because I thought nobody in the department is working on children's research. So this will be a good positioning for myself to contribute to the strengths of the department. But on a wider level, it's also my contribution to, you know, the scant research when it comes to children and communication, for example. Because if you go to conferences, children's research is considered not sexy. You know, if you go to panel sessions, no, usually walang attendance ang mga children and communication panels. No, and I see that as an opportunity, no, to position myself as a researcher, because then I grew more maturely when it comes to viewing the topic of research, no, as children as a topic of research. So I started to develop this personal advocacy, no, because when you start growing into reading the research gaps and the literature, you know, I would realize that, you know, children are seen as becomings and not as beings, and so they're seen as, you know, insignificant sectors in society, and so that's where I also started to develop that advocacy. So as you can see from a personal interest, it was tempered by and encouraged by an institutional positioning, and then turning into a bigger social advocacy for me. So that when I do research, you are more compelled to publish them. You are more compelled to convert them into policy, in something that will help local government units and communities. And so that's where the integration of the three factors come in. So when you grow, as you grow into the discipline, you go into the center, actually. It becomes more natural that all these three become integrated, no? That the personal is also institutional and also societal. So let me end with that emphasis, but Dr. Aris will talk more about the societal aspect or influence when it comes to exploring research ideas. So on that note, let me introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is Dr. Aris Arugay, who is Professor of Political Science from the University of the Philippines in Diliman. He is also Editor-in-Chief of Asian Politics and Policy, an academic journal published by Wiley Blackwell and the Policy Studies Organization. His research interests are comparative democratization, civil-military relations, electoral politics, and foreign policy. He was a visiting scholar in the Carter Center, Universidad Mayor de San Simon in Bolivia, Chulalongkorn University in Thailand, the University of Sydney in Australia, Jeju Peace Institute, South Korea, the University of Michigan at Ann Arbor, the National Institute of Defense Studies in Japan, and the ISAIAS, the Yusof Ishak Institute in Singapore. He obtained his PhD in political science from Georgia State University, United States in 2014 as a Fulbright Fellow. He obtained his MA and BA cum laude in political science from the University of the Philippines in Diliman. In 2020, the National Academy of Science and Technology of the Philippines awarded him as an outstanding young scientist in political science for his contributions to research in political science, and in particular for the study of democratization processes, security sector reform, and strategic studies in the Philippines and Asia. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, please welcome Dr. Aris Arugay.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ravi. Thank you also to Dr. Anjo for being part of this panel. Thank you also to Dean Hernan for the kind invitation. Magandang hapon po sa ating lahat. Ako po ay ang salingkit dito sa panel because I am not really a communication or media research scholar, but I do appreciate the kind invitation being extended to someone coming from a sister discipline. And I do hope that what I will share this afternoon will be highly valuable to our participants. So I would then like to share my screen. Okay. So Dr. Anjo has covered the personal dimension in identifying or exploring research, while Dr. Randy has given us an excellent discussion on the institutional approach or setting in order to identify research gaps. My task is to somehow come full circle and emphasize the importance of societal and historical contexts in research gap identification. And as also done by Dr. Lorenzana and Dr. Solis, I will also draw from my own experience in doing research, particularly in political science. But just to, it's good that I'm last because we can somehow, I could somehow emphasize certain, hopefully major takeaways that our participants will appreciate, that a research gap is a question or a problem in which not enough existing research is done, or extant research is outdated and therefore needs to be re-updated, or as what Dr. Solis perhaps mentioned earlier, reimagined in a way, because if you will be a bit reflexive about your respective research experiences so far, there's a lot of imagination at work. And this is why whenever we say that a gap, there is a research gap, a lot of it is a product of construction. It may be a personal, I mean, in the sense that a gap normally is recognized as existing both by the personal researcher, but also the discipline in which that researcher is the discipline that he or she practices, or even the larger scholarly community, the institutional setup that he locates or she locates within. Research gap is a topic or an area for which missing or insufficient information limits the ability to conclude a question. And in fact, research gaps often come from existing research. So normally, new research studies produces more research gaps in the future. And if you notice, every time you write a research paper or a publication, normally it ends with identifying what the future agenda will be or future direction. So by filling in a research gap, the researcher also is tasked to identify other research gaps. So only when you are able to do that do you come full circle. But I also want to make a difference, because in my own experience as a researcher for almost 2 decades, research gaps also varies on the types of research that one undertakes. While certain disciplines make a clear distinction between basic and applied or policy research, we in political science, the lines are very blurry. It is very rare that you find a political scientist or a political science researcher who does only basic research, because all of our studies inevitably policy dimensions. So it's very rare for political scientists to treat their research in the ivory tower sense, and that I'm simply contributing to the knowledge and I don't have any policy implications in my own research. But a research gap that is somehow inspired or driven by policy research is a bit different, because it is more problem solving than simply filling in the gaps or filling in spaces within the existing body of scholarship. In policy research, wherein a lot of us are or will get involved too, because a lot of the resources being poured on research always explores the policy dimension. A research gap is driven by the observation that the current knowledge limits the ability of decision makers, particularly maybe politicians or policymakers, from making decisions. So normally when we identify policy-oriented research gaps, they're based on concrete, observed, and lived problems or issues being faced, not only by the research or academic community, but the larger society. I was able to find this in the net, that there are different types of research gaps. Although all of this, the boundaries seem to be more analytical than actual boundaries, this somehow at least expands our notion of what a research gap is. So while there are gaps that are more academic oriented, perhaps like an empirical gap, a knowledge gap, and even an evidence gap, there are also those that seem to be a bit more applied. Okay, population gap, an application or implementation gap, and a methodology gap. So when you're trying to identify research gaps, you also have to bear in mind what actual gaps in the knowledge exist. Is it just a simple function of what is yet to be proven empirically, or it has something to do with the lack of confirmatory evidence? Meaning, so far we know that, for example, I give an example that is related to communication research. There is a lot of experimental studies so far that says that fact-checking do not necessarily work, in the sense that they don't reduce support for extremist politicians or politicians that harbor fake news. In fact, a lot of experimental studies, just like in France, and recently I saw a study done by a Japanese political scientist in the Philippines, in the last Philippine elections, that seemed to confirm this hypothesis that support for politicians who are known to peddle fake news increases even after respondents are exposed to fact checks. Okay, so if this is indeed a research gap, meaning it hasn't reached the status of a conventional wisdom or something that is accepted by the research community, then this is something that could be identified as a research gap. Okay, other research gaps are also more methodological, meaning while we have good research questions being asked, and is the current toolkit up to par in addressing a lot of these research questions? Or should we embrace more innovative research designs, or should we consult other disciplines, particularly their respective methodological toolkits, in order to address methodological gaps? Okay, so let me go straight to the last. Now, if you can still have that picture of the framework that Dr. Anjo led in formulating, it is also important to locate ourselves as researchers as part of a larger community, not just our institution, but society itself. No? Because research, after all, is a collective undertaking, because its outputs are a public good. Even though sometimes knowledge products are very difficult to be made accessible, no? I mean, journal article pa lang, nahihirapan tayo minsan to access. But I think there is an increasing norm that, for example, if a research study is publicly funded, then therefore all of its products and outputs, even the data that has been gathered, must be made publicly available, because after all, research is for the public good and not just the private benefit of some. So in order to, I think these are some of the things that I thought in thinking about the societal context to research gaps. As a researcher, you must be able to identify what table of observation do you want to sit in, quote unquote. Is it just purely a conversation of academics? But we all know that the idea so far of this presentation is that academics need to get out of their towers and need to engage with the larger community, because not only research is for a public good, but I do find that researchers that are a bit more sensitive to their societal environments produce better research. It is also important to approach it not just individually, but also through your membership, to to professional associations and scholarly communities. That's why this organization led by Dean Hernan is very important. And I also notice, given I already have 2 decades experience in research, that as you mature more into the research enterprise, the more that your research projects gets to be more socially embedded, right? The more that you are socialized in the canon of research norms and ethical principles, because you just don't end in producing knowledge products or research articles, but you do your part in ensuring that some of the policy recommendations or some of the key takeaways of your research gets to change or even influence policy, change the way things are being done, and specifically address problems. So the figure on the left is actually a website, democratic-erosion.com, of which I am a faculty member. This is a cross-university collaboration of, I think, more than 30 university professors around the world. And this was because a lot of the countries around the world are undergoing what we call the erosion of their democratic institutions and norms. So I was invited to join, and I'm unfortunately, we need to expand this in the Philippines, but I'm the only Filipino member. So if you're interested to join and teach a class on erosion of democracy, which I am currently teaching as a graduate class in our department, please let me know. I mentioned this as an example because this has in fact influenced all my research pursuits. I basically problematized why certain democracies like the Philippines not maturing or not being more institutionally strong compared to others. So that has basically influenced my research endeavors. But we all know that is not simply because it was highly fashionable, because when I started this research endeavor, there were very few democracies that were in trouble. A lot of democracies back in the early 2000s were doing actually quite well. However, as things turn out, if we look at the world right now, it's actually the reverse. There are less strong democracies. There are a lot of democracies being made vulnerable by extremism, by populism, by a new brand of the strong man ruler, and very few democracies are able to resist populism, and this includes the Philippines. So I'll identify 5 strategies in research gap discovery, though this overlaps with Dr. Solis and Dr. Lorenzana's presentation, but just to reinstate that it's important to consult your institution's research agenda. If none exist, maybe consult your colleagues to create one. When I was Associate Dean of Research of the College of Social Sciences and Philosophy in UP, this research agenda is basically a sacred document. Sacred in the sense that this is the one in which we always consult in approving research applications of faculty for deloading, meaning in the university where I belong to, if you are doing research, you can actually get course releases, meaning teach less. But you can't just do any research project that you want. This has to be juxtaposed with the existing research agenda of your department and also of the college. Benchmark with existing research institutions or disciplinal peers if you don't have one. A research agenda is a strategic research plan that can guide in the identification of research gaps. And it can also serve as a catalyst in instilling a research culture that is not just individual but collective in nature. A good project also to undertake is to do a research historiography of your institution. What kinds of past research studies have been undertaken by your colleagues in the past and even present? What kinds of consultancy work do they do? And not only research, but also what we call in UP extension, meaning all of the non-academic work that professors do in the larger constituency that they belong to. Gather the research narratives of your colleagues and map research competencies and skills of your institution. Undertake stakeholder engagement analysis, meaning identify your stakeholders and constituents clearly. Explore the potential research gaps within your existing extension work. So for example, a major part of my extension work is what we call in the field of international politics or relations, track to diplomacy. This often allows us to go to conferences or workshops abroad and engage with diplomats, with officials from ASEAN, with officials from the major countries around the world, and exchange ideas. It's called track to diplomacy because official diplomacy is very constricted. No, as diplomats, you can only espouse the official line of your government. Academics like myself are often invited because we're a bit more flexible when we speak and give our opinion. It's not the opinion of the Philippine government or the government that we represent. And this somehow creates the environment for discussion, for debate, and policy and inputs or insights for foreign policy. So I give this is an example of one output that we produced, particularly when a lot of countries are being under threat of China's influence operations. So I wrote the Philippine chapter in this, and in fact, this edited volume has produced a lot of research, possible research undertakings in the Philippines on to what extent China has been influencing a lot of dimensions of the Philippines beyond politics, economics, and even sociocultural dimensions. No? The research gap is that to what extent China has been influencing the Philippine politics and society, particularly according to one study by a Singaporean scholar, the Philippines is the 5th most influenced country in China all over the world. So from a country that's very pro-West or very to be 5th place is indeed not only a research gap, but it's totally for me even an anomaly. How could the Philippines be 5th within the span of 6 years? 4th, collaborate with your other colleagues, and I'm not just talking. Of course, collaborating with your colleagues from within your institution is highly recommended. I think there's nothing more fulfilling than working together with your colleagues in your own institution, but also expand the potential of collaboration to other institutions. It could be quite fulfilling, as well as you'll also learn a lot, but also explore what we call multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary research collaborations, because you will realize that the research gaps that you'll identify is quite different if different lenses are being used. So for example, in my own research on populism and polarization, my sociologist friends would have in fact enriched my theoretical approach to studying populism, for example, because I can distinctly remember one sociologist told me that, you better read Goffman's performativity concept. And when I read it, I'm like, oh, wow, this basically describes the phenomenon that I'm interested in, because I was studying how populism is being used in foreign policy formulation in the Philippines. So the performative nature of populism in the Philippines, of the last president of the country, somehow was highly instructive in analyzing the lens of performativity. And finally, do perform monitoring and evaluation. Be very reflexive on your research outputs and the research knowledge that you produce. Individually and possibly collectively assess research outputs in order to readjust research goals and identify future research gaps. So I just want to share a shameless self-promotion, but also I think this is the reason why I've become I've been in the radar of Dean Hernan and Randy, because I've explored doing this information research out of really a response to the research gap that a lot of political scientists are not really doing a lot on addressing this information. And a recent article in the journal Pacific Affairs that I wrote with a graduate student has been recently published. And I have a few copies to give away, but I can also share the the article to those who are interested in reading it. Siguro mamaya na lang. But with this, I end, and hopefully our participants have learned a lot from the personal to the institutional and to the societal dimensions of research gap identification. And I look forward to the Q&A portion and discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aris. Thank you to all of our speakers. Now let us proceed to our open forum. But for that, let's take this opportunity for taking first just to document this special event. So may we request everyone participating this afternoon to please turn on their video so that we may capture this moment all together. Dr. Hernan, who will take the photo pala for us?
I can take.
Okay. Sige.
Okay, so people are turning on the cameras. There are 3 panels, so please hold your smile. Thank you for staying. Very happy na 117 pa din tayo ngayon. So, okay, first panel, 1, 2, 3. One more, 1, 2, 3. Okay, panel 2. You don't know in which panel you're appearing, so please hold your smile. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. A third and final panel. 1, 2, 3. One more. 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dean Hernan. Again, now on to our discussion. To pose a question or comment, type your question in the chat box. You may also raise your hand to be acknowledged. Once called, kindly unmute and turn your video on to give your question or comment. Let me request, they have turned their cameras on now, Dr. Aris and Dr. Anjo. May we start with the first question? Do we have a question from our participants in the chat group, in the chat box? Okay, sige. But I've received some questions beforehand. Maybe we can start with this one. Okay, communication sometimes is regarded as instrumental rather than central or intrinsic to national development. What are your thoughts about this? How may we address such regard for our discipline? Yan, medyo hindi kasaling kit-kit dito, Dr. Aris, no? Because you also have your multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary perspective, and we can benefit from that. So communication is not seen as intrinsic, but it's said to be instrumental in national development. So what can we say about this?
Can I address that, Anora?
Yes, please, Anjo.
Okay. In the discipline, we cannot think of communication as something that is separate from social life. In fact, it is constitutive of social life. So that's the theory, okay? So also, I think there's no easy answer to that question because that is actually a debate. So when we approach that debate, it is about how we are going to see the terms of the debate, which means to say, how are we defining communication? Okay, and of course that's depending on the kind of epistemology that we have, the kind of understanding of the nature of social life. But I guess I would argue that communication is about sharing meaning, and that basic definition from the more humanistic proponents of communication, okay, can provide a basic understanding of what it's supposed to do. In fact, by adopting that meaning, then it will help organizing social life. So from my perspective, then I cannot imagine communication not particularly happening when we talk about the society or social phenomena. So I'd rather approach it from that level. I think some of such questions I think have to be revisited every now and then. We always have to be reminded of our basic assumption. Yeah.
Siguro I'd just like to add, no, I'm just very epistemological in that approach to answering that question. I'd like to go naman to the practical side. Like Aris already mentioned earlier, that there is seems to be a disparate distinction between policy research and basic research. And I think as academics and researchers, we have to look at, like I personally look at research as helping. No, so it's like not separate from the realities on the ground. So, for example, if I do field research, the results that I get from that research ought to be communicated back to that community because they own data of the particular research, and they can convert that into like policy, into rules and particular legislation for the local government, for the community. So research can be that. No, research shouldn't be seen as, it may contribute to theorization, which is seen as basic research. But there are also the descriptive aspects of your research, which may be used for policy development. No? So this shouldn't be seen as two disparate things. No? And that's one thing. The second thing is that communication, like I mentioned, institutionally, is always a program component. No, we always attach ourselves. It's constitutive of everything. It's part of and constitutive of everything in human society, which communicates, which is a social society. No? So anything and everything topic in communication, even if we attach ourselves to different disciplines. Like yun nga, in health, no, even if you are studying health in UP Manila, for example, you can do research on health communication because you need to communicate the desired behaviors, for example, when it comes to vaccination, when it comes to hand washing and all of this stuff. No? So communication is always part of any field. It's attached to any field. Aris, you want to say something?
Yeah, siguro dagdag na lang. I mean, for me, if you will look at all our policy problems or issues right now, the COVID-19 pandemic, the problems we've had in the last electoral cycle, a lot of this come from the idea that community is seen as instrumental rather than intrinsic. So for example, the rampant disinformation during the COVID-19 pandemic, it's because there was no effective communication plan at every process, right, at every step of the pandemic response. So because unfortunately, the societal environment that we are right now, communication is not only being instrumentalized, it's being weaponized. So kanina that Dr. Randy, you mentioned about the power and the politics behind research. This has also something to do with communicating knowledge, communicating policies, communicating rules, communicating responses. So those that controls communication gets to set what at this point even what is true and what is the policy solution, even if every research study that has been conducted, the gargantuan evidence and scientific proof has said that this doesn't work. But because we live in a post-truth world, communication is now being seen as, I'm sorry to use the term, the lines between communication and propaganda are increasingly being blurred. This is really the challenge for the discipline of communication research and communication studies or communication at large, is because you have this very politicized, polarized environment. And that now everyone gets to have that badge of, I am a communicator, so I'll communicate what, even if it's propaganda or it's untrue. I'll do it.
Yeah, I just remembered, Aris, when I teach my students, I always start by saying, in an information or digital society, communication is the new gold. And those who know how to handle communication will rule society. And this is what you're seeing now. So if you want to combat that, you interrogate that power structure, we also have to use communication to reveal what is true, even in a post-truth society. So that's one thing. And to unearth that, research has to be there, and that's communication research. So I think we emphasize the importance, no? But do we have more questions here? We have from Christian here. This may not be related to the prior discussions, but I'm just curious if there's a way communication research or research can be understandable and appealing to ordinary Filipinos at the same time, acceptable to the research community. Do these kinds of research can be a catalyst in encouraging critical thinking? So medyo parang research dissemination na ito. We'll have a separate section for that in the masterclass, but we can answer that too, Dr. Aris, Dr. Anjo.
Parang, I defer to Dr. Anjo.
It's yeah. Can we make it more understandable and appealing to ordinary Filipinos, the research that we do?
Okay. Right. Again, I think the question there is the same parang sort of thread from the previous round, which I think looks at communication as the BNN of it all, when in fact it's a paradox in the sense that when, for example, we talk about communicating, reaching out to people, it's about sharing meaning, okay? And in the process of communication, we cannot ignore that how we communicate is also influenced by our position in the social structure, okay? So our position in the social structure is a relational position, okay? So I think that we must always remember. And relationality in social life is very important in the sense that we acknowledge, for instance, the power relations, okay? The power relations actually somehow configure, diba, how we communicate meaning, okay? Are we imposing certain values, okay? Are we listening to people? So this is a matter of social relation. So I think these are the very fundamentals of if we make certain claims about how do we communicate our knowledge to the common people, I think that question already presupposes a kind of gap. Okay, when in fact I think it's really about at this point improving our educational system. Okay. If we want to do away with these kinds of assumptions where we presuppose certain knowledge gaps. Okay, so again, my default answer is, there are problems in Philippine society that are historical. They are complex because the kinds of agencies that have worked in the past and continue to work now have really not addressed such problems head on. And we cannot pin the blame on certain actors, okay? These are complex processes in which case I think we have to start somewhere. And again, the experience, the process of, let's just say, building a nation doesn't happen overnight. There is a struggle. We must engage in the struggle. And that is the struggle to really have a kind of vision in which we all have equal opportunities to, share the resources, the bounty of the Philippines. You know what I mean? Right. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is that we have complex problems and it cannot be the case that communication is, or media is overdetermined as the BNN of it all. Yeah.
I agree. No, the idea of, I think, communication research or research in general as solving all of the problems that are deeply ingrained in society is messianic, no, and
yes.
It's not feasible, no. But I think how we can make this more practical, convert this into a more practical activity is that we look at communication research as translatable into depending on your audience. No? So communication research is usually, like, as we publish them as thesis, as we publish them as journal articles, really the audience there is the academic community. No? But if we really want to reach certain audiences, like if we want to reach the youth, we can convert all of these theses and journal articles into something that the youth can access or the community can access. So if a certain class may not be able to understand, highfalutin words and big concepts, we translate them to what is understandable to them. But then it takes a work after the research. So and that's, I think it will be discussed in another masterclass session. The idea is message design. Who are you targeting and how do you design your message so that it may be understood by your audience? So that's research and then some. So additional effort to reach your appropriate audience. Sige, Aris, nag-defer ka sa amin. So let's jump to another question kasi mukhang dumadami na sila. Although merong request, si Karen from FEU. Hi, Karen. To Aris. So nag-thumbs up na si Aris. So you papadalan ka ng link to that article. Si Marlene Tejada has a very interesting question here. While you said that the three areas, personal, institutional mandates, and social contexts, converge in identifying the research agenda, is it not that the latter has more weight because research ethics is of prime importance in research, especially these days when we are keen on human protection? Pinag-usapan natin to last time. So who would like to answer that?
Simulan ko and then Dr. Anjo can fill in. That is quite true. That's why I mentioned that as you mature into research, the more that you are made aware of the larger context, societal context. But I also observe that there is more and more an increasing recognition of the importance of research ethicality. For example, we in the College of Social Sciences and Philosophy has already an active and existing research ethics board that we painstakingly formed. It took many years, but I think we are the only research ethics boards, if I'm not mistaken, please correct me kung meron na kayo sa College of Masscom, we're the only research ethics board in Diliman so far. Yeah. But the Philippine Social Science Council also has one. It exists. And in fact, I'm currently a member of that research ethics board. But this indicates that the norms of the importance of research ethics is something that and I know in Ateneo and in LaSalle they're much quicker in forming this. No, in UP we are slower and it requires a lot of debates and a lot of hair pulling before there's a consensus. The need is always there, no, but how to get there is something natatak UP na it takes years. What I'm saying is that institutions and increasingly because when we teach research, we always emphasize ethics, but not only on the conduct of research, but to actually how to treat our participants, we call them human subjects, no, formally, but these are also your constituents, no. These are also, so just to treat them as sources of data is something that if you wear the hat of a researcher that is embedded in the larger societal sphere, you won't treat people as just means to a journal article or to an end. No, this is something that is and this is why the question earlier of communicating your research output and maintaining stakeholder engagement is of utmost importance, not only because it will help you identify new research gaps and therefore new research projects and therefore new research publications in the future, but this is something that must be habituated as part of your philosophy and your own research identity, I would even say, no, identity as a researcher.
Anjo?
Okay, so yeah, I mean, research ethics. Okay, No, I just want to read the question again. Right. Actually, there are many ways to approach, research ethics, because on one hand, of course, there's the principle of, not harming your research participants while you do research. And on the other hand, there's also a need to produce knowledge. So this is the classic kind of ethical dilemma. Okay. But at the end of the day, I think it really depends on our orientation to knowledge production, because if it's communal, then everybody benefits. Okay, so I think we need to revive this notion of communal knowledge. Okay, because if the researcher is separated from society because of certain ways of generating knowledge, then that's the moment that we impose this kind of power relationship, diba? And here, the process of producing knowledge becomes embedded in this kind of power relationship, okay, where we separate the knower and the known. When in fact, researchers are embedded in particular societies. So again, I would again reflect on this at the philosophical level, because at some point, we really need to revisit our assumptions, because certain practices really originate from false dichotomies, diba? The researcher and the researched. Okay, so again, in the queer mode, I would unsettle our assumptions.
You will cause, what do you call that? You will cause havoc. Chaos, yes. Mas malakas yung term ko, havoc. But I think yung interpretation ko with the question of Marlene Tejada, something to do with, the rankings amongst the three. We talked about that last time when we developed our
right.
So our reflection on that is that, whilst the societal context is really the most ethical and the most moral, because you want to do research that is universal and for the benefit of everyone, we cannot downplay the fact that, like, for example, in the undergraduate courses that we teach, students really just choose topics that are interesting to them, and also start that when we teach research. We tell them, choose a topic that you would like to work on, you're interested in, it excites you. And we do that because we want them to finish. We want them to finish and to keep the stamina and the excitement of the course. So it's not to say that the personal is not ethical also. So that's why we did not initially meron pa kaming framework na medyo parang vertical ba, pataas, na highest si social. But these are all, they interplay all together. So even if you have a social aspiration as a topic, but you are hindered by your institutional, lumalabas mas mataas si institutional kaysa kay social, right? So it's not really that hierarchy, but the intersections of the three. That's why we emphasize na as you grow, ni Aris, as go into the intersections of the three, it becomes natural that the personal is already institutional and also social. So that's what we wanted to emphasize in the
Yeah. Kasi very quick. I just thought that it's important, especially for those of us who are teaching research methods in undergrad, that to start teaching ethics is on the research process itself. How to be an ethical researcher. How to maintain integrity of your data, integrity of your analysis, moving away from plagiarism and all of that, and ensuring that you report the data as you collected it, not as the way you wanted the data to look like. But as you move in your research career, the more that your level of ethics or your plane of ethics changes from the ethicality of procedure to the ethicality of research goals, of research motivations. To be just one without the other is unethical. Meaning, ang base is the ethicality of a researcher with integrity in terms of conducting research.
Yeah.
Then the larger battle is really how do we respond to the larger ethical problems faced by our society that could be addressed through research.
Right. Yeah, totally agree. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go, Anjo. Go. Continue.
Yeah, I want to emphasize the points that we made. No, now we cannot make these false dichotomies, but we have to see the relations of these interlocking dimensions. Yeah.
Thank you, Anjo and Aris. Ito, medyo a little personal yung question from Dr. Hernan. How do we overcome our insecurities as researchers? Big question. Many of us may have an imposter syndrome, trying to tackle big social issues while feeling that our personal capacities are limited. Hashtag hugot. Oh, sige, who wants to answer that question?
I think yung
insecurities.
Yung imposter and insecurities, it will always be there. It's a constant in research, especially if you really take your identity and your positionality in mind all the time, because as researchers we want to discover, and for someone to be able to say na I already know what the data will look like, I already know the results, I just want to do research to confirm it, then you're leaving the wonder part of research. You're leaving it behind, because in fact for me the most interesting research studies that I've read, intuitive studies, meaning those that defy conventional thinking, and to have this imposter syndrome might be more a function of maybe the lack of confidence on skill, which can be, for me, ang sinasabi ko sa mga students ko, you learn by doing. No?
Right.
So you become a better researcher if you keep at it. But the imposter will always be there. Sabi ko nga, when I when I embarked on this information studies, I felt quite insecure because I was reading all these amazing studies by my colleagues in CMC, in Ateneo, in LaSalle, and really for me they've done a lot of work, but I saw that there's a gap in the sense that the politics side of this information is not being seen more and investigated more. So I cannot totally replace the research conducted by my communication colleagues, by Fatima, by Cheryl, by Jace, but somehow I could be less of an imposter by using a lot of their work, hopefully collaborating on them, but having my own disciplinal take on a phenomenon that we are all investigating. So I think by being aware of your limitations, it sounds contradictory, but being aware of your limitations actually addresses the imposter syndrome.
Anjo, you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. It is by doing that you become, okay? And where in your journey as a researcher, okay, you will get that kind of confidence, okay? And of course, we all know that not everyone is really fit or cut out to be researchers, diba? In the same way that not everyone can be, for instance, Michael Jordan, you know what I mean? Right, so it's a reality of life. So if it's your calling, then it is your duty to yourself and to the world. Yeah.
Ako at the very basic, it's still skill, right? Sabi ni Aris, no? So the very basic, to address your insecurities, brush up on your skills. But I tell my students, you don't automatically become great researchers naman, no? And everyone can learn the skill. Yeah. But what's unique to you is your research imagination and the gap that you identify. That's unique to you. And yun yung sinabi ni Aris kanina. So if you match that uniqueness of your own perspective as a researcher and with the skill that you have, which you constantly will develop over time, then that's your journey towards being a great researcher. So very magandang question from Dr. Hernan. But now we have another question from Mark Ritchie. If societal and institutional domains have strong conflicting paradigms, like pitting the scientific against the popular, how can we personally position ourselves in such a situation to thrive in research?
This is also an excellent question.
Yes,
and
yes.
This is something that I think I cover when I teach research methods in political science, because if your discipline is really embedded in the policy world, in the practical world, what is popular and what is academically enticing, the difference of the differential is quite minute. However, I also know political scientists who refuse to jump into the fads of at dito yung sinasabi natin na parang nag-iiba-iba ng research topics, hindi lang siya specialist. But for me, I mean, there is also an issue if you just if you just totally rely on the lacunae that you created or that you helped create, and you don't appreciate the ramifications of your own research. So for me, yung what is popular, that's true that they could be conflicting, but as someone who studies power, I also, for me, if there is a big difference on what is scientific and popular, I will investigate the power dynamic on why such a difference exists. So what is scientifically appealing and what is appealing to the public? Why is there such a gap? Hindi naman siya totally different research project, but you have to think about that your role as a researcher, it must be balanced on what the demands of academe are. And because in the end, if you totally rely on one side, the question that will be asked to you is, so what? So what? My 10 journal articles got that 5 people read. But to totally just makikiuso without being equipped and without having the necessary skill to address the research popularity of a theme, then in the end, you will also produce sorry to use the term, mediocre outputs. So I think dapat mabalance yun. Hindi naman totally na pag popular, hindi ako magre-research about it. But to totally say naman that kung ano yung uso dun ako, that also affects your credibility and your integrity as a researcher.
Anjo, you want to say something?
Okay. So picking up from what Dr. Arugay said as the kind of power dynamics on what is considered scientific and popular. Okay. Again, we see the kind of power relationship. Who is telling us what is knowledge and what is not? Okay. Now, from where I'm coming from anthropology. Okay, we value everyday common sense. Okay, but because anthropologists also theorize, we also make a comment on people's common sense. Okay, so we need to balance these two tendencies. Okay, because one is lived experience, the other one is a person looking from outside. Okay, so more or less, this generates different perspectives. Okay, so I guess at the end of the day, it's really about seeking the truth, and there is no one path to seeking truth that we claim we claim as something that resonates, diba? So in that sense, it's really about our thinking and how we actually produce knowledge. Okay? I think, parang we should be more attentive to, okay, people's everyday knowledge, but at the same time also create habits of thinking, okay, that doesn't make us prone to lies. Okay? and this is where the scientific method is of paramount importance, diba? Always, making claims based on, of course, evidence, and that is the basis of theory. So what I'm trying to say is that it's really the habit of thinking and claiming truth that I think problematized. So I guess, but that's how I'm gonna approach it, rather than parang reinforce again, the power relationship in knowledge production. Yeah. So ideally, I think we can envision a society where people can really make claims that are verifiable.
Sige, ako naman, I'm coming in from, communication perspective, like anthropology and political science. Like in our program, for example, we have a course on research dissemination. So for us, scientific and popular is not really a disparate distinction. Like it's still about human experience. You do a scientific work about human experience, a social experience. You do a popular translation to it. It's still about that experience. So it's really a matter of messaging it. Babalik ako ulit dun sa dissemination and popularization of research. No, so I'll give some one was my MA dissertation about, just ko malalaman yung age ko, SMS mobile romance. No, so it's very pure research. Why would you do? I wanted to look at level of relationship development, and the modes and the practices. It's very scientific in that sense, no? But I was invited to translate it into a popular magazine article, and then I was invited to host to join in a radio program, no? So that's where you translate your scientific messages to a more popularized version, and that's where you can reach the right audiences, yung sinasabi ko. So for example, something like a pure scientific research about relationship development. When you attend a radio program, you talk about the risks of mobile relationships. So that's where it becomes more practical. No? That's where it becomes more useful to the audience who are listening to about your research in a different platform. So again, it's really, for me, wala siyang ganun ka distinctions. But you cannot do that all the time. No? I mean, having said that, you cannot do that all the time. So for me, ang mindset ko dyan is you pick your battles. No? There are instances when I do research, and my purpose really is for knowledge sake. It's really for theorization. And therefore, my audience is the academic community. So, and then there are instances when I do research, community field research, and therefore I need to popularize. No? The first output that I need to produce is the popular version of the research. So maybe pick your battles. No, research. I mean, we're doing a lot already, doing research, and then we have these expectations that we have to please all kinds of audiences. No, then be kind to yourself, no? And then pick your battles. If you feel that this is something that ought to be popularized, this is something that ought to be just on a scientific level, then go that direction. But if you can do like traverse these societal, scientific, ethical, and personal contexts at the same time, then that's great, diba? Sige, good. Meron pa tayong 2 more questions and we still have time, no? That's good. We really intentionally limited our presentation so we have more time for Q&A. Mas maganda yung Q&A kaysa sa presentation. So we have a question from Mopet Varles. I noticed among my students that in identifying research gaps, they are usually torn between the research agenda of their sponsoring institutions or workplace and that of the universities where they are pursuing their graduate studies. So I presume ito yung mga graduate students natin, no, na meron silang workplace and then they're also affiliated with the university. It then becomes our responsibility as research teachers to make sure that the students' proposed research addresses an issue in the industry or in society. So parang it's a comment, but do we want to discuss that a bit more?
Siguro ako very quickly, no, because
Yeah.
I have direct experience on this, because we have graduate students who, for example, work for government, work for the military, they are researchers in the military research institutions or in the bureaucracy, and oftentimes they're actually not allowed to use data or information from their workplace in their own studies, no? So it would have been very easy for them, for example, to write a thesis if they could only tap the data or the information that they have themselves collected, because they're already researchers, no? So in this regard, I tell them that's the downside, but dito rin papasok yung sinasabi ko, your creativity. So long as you're not violating any protocols, you can actually use the research that you've conducted in your workplace, no, for your graduate degree, so long as yung minsan naman iba naman kasi kailangan lang magpaalam, no? So if that is done, then they're allowed, no, to use the research that they have conducted. But this is quite common for us because we have students in our international studies and political science programs who work for government or work for NGOs. Sa NGOs, medyo mas maluwag. But for government, particularly in the defense sector, medyo mahirap to. But the way to do this is to always err on the safe side, meaning always ask permission. Don't just assume na, I collected this data naman in my job, then I can just, you might read the fine print, you don't own the data because you are collecting data on behalf of your institution. Magkaiba yon if you are doing it as a thesis student. And I think, and this is where one thing that anthropologists are very good at, that political scientists are not, is the reflexivity. And kasi kami, parang ang canon sa amin, labas ka parate sa research na ginagawa mo. But we all know that in the other social science disciplines, you cannot totally do that, and you need to be more and more cognizant and let others recognize the positionality of your research undertakings.
Yeah.
Ako nakikita ko dito, this is personal and institutional. Kasi for me, a lot of my master students talagang, they want to get data from their companies kasi convenient. That's where they're working. So they have data sets, they have access to information. But then, dito pumapasok si interactions with the institutional. Institutional now meaning the university and your institution, wherein you have to deal with permissions. No, like can you use the data of your particular company? So then that adds to the filter of the activity. So again, basta all permissions are in place. That if you can apply for ethics approval, even better, no, and ethics review, and I think that's okay. So ito yung pwedeng guiding principle ni MOPET. Always err on the safe side. No? Always get your permissions. Anjo, you want to add pa?
Yeah, but this is what we call the kind of negotiations that we make. This is part of our role as serious researchers. Parang we also have to deal with, institutional constraints, diba? And rules. The reason why we have these rules is, to prevent, malpractices in research. Okay, so we have to be aware that it is part of our practice to deal with these kinds of negotiations in terms of what we can do and what we cannot do in research. Yeah.
Okay. Sige, we'll go to the last question. No, this one from Mark Ritchie. Ayan, meron pa pala. Pero try na natin kung may time pa. But Mark Ritchie's question is, how does the framework, the one that we presented, impact on researcher reflexivity and establishing trustworthiness in qualitative research? Sige, who wants to answer?
untested pa no yung phone.
Yeah.
So this is
yeah.
may evidence gap pa, but I think this is really more and more researchers are becoming reflexive, and there is also now a recognition that of the importance of being a researcher that is not only trusted by your peers but also trusted by the community. We've heard horror stories of parachute foreign scholars coming in and then doing all of that. This might be a totally different webinar, but we must not take for granted that we might also doing the same practices as some of these foreign scholars. So it's important for us to be able to establish trust and confidence with our community, not make promises that we will not keep so low just to get rapport and just to get the data that we want, and then kakalimutan na sila after, because a lot of these communities, they need help, and they think that pag may pumuntang researcher doon na doing research on one of their many problems, that they will solve the problem. So we have to temper expectations, but we must also ensure that our research will be socially valuable at the same time.
This reflexivity should be put in writing. I mean, declare your positionality. No, I mean, lalong-lalo na in qualitative research, there is a space for that. No, because you are involved in the research, you're the instrument, you're the tool. You have to declare your position, and all these three factors, no, three influences are valid. They are real constraints or encouragements for a researcher. And for as long as you declare that, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And it makes it even more helpful for other researchers who read your work. No? And then they can also, the gaps become narrower because you explain it for them. You've done it for them. So I think that's how I can answer that. Anjo?
Yes, I mean, correct. So Dr. Arugay said that it's really the contribution of anthropology to be reflexive about our not just our methods, but also our objective as a researcher. Because precisely in ethnographic or immersive methods, because you become part of the lives of your research participants. Okay, so and here, although we can knowledge production really gets into the intimate realm. So meaning to say you really have intimate knowledge of people, but there's also your responsibility. I mean, the collective responsibility, not just you as a researcher, but as a profession and also as an institution, to have the best interest of your research participants. Okay, so I think that's the main criterion, and reflexivity comes also with your maturation as a researcher. Okay, because it's very important to acknowledge your limitations, your personal agenda, and of course the wider concerns. Meaning to say, does that knowledge benefit all? Okay, and not just, of course, the researcher. And as we have previously argued, that the more you conduct research, the more you become aware of these parameters. And at some point, in your scholarly work, you're able to articulate this certain kind of ethical principle and relation in your own work.
Ayan, sige. I medyo na-OC ako. Can I just jump onto this last question? Maybe we can just get crisp answers from the three of us. No? But this is very important pagdating sa identification of research gaps. No? Although this is also something to do with research dissemination, but the gaps are also identified through research dissemination. Ang nakalagay dito from Charles Bautista, ang daming magagandang thesis pero may nagbabasa ba? Are they being utilized at all? Or are they just gathering dust in libraries? So maybe succinctly, how can we address this question as our last question for this masterclass?
Right. Yeah, for me, when I was a grad student, there wasn't any push, like really direct and really powerful push to publish unless you join the academy. But I think there
Tools
is
makeup din na. Pero si Ding nasa gusto mo, dalahan kita.
there's
Ha?
there's an increasing
Ayan.
motivation now for advisors, for professors who mentor graduate students to convert their thesis and dissertations in not only just academic outputs, but even popular policy-oriented outputs.
Thank you, Aris. Sige, Anjo.
Yeah, well, an immediate course of action would be to share it with your colleagues or your peers, your friends. And social media is the platform for that. Okay, so we have in our department we have presentations of our thesis, poster presentations, etc. Such kinds of activities for the undergrad. Yeah.
It's very important, no, research dissemination, because how else can we identify the research gaps if we don't know what's out there? No, but I think in a digital society, we're experiencing better and better and a bigger net, no, in terms of spreading researches. No, so we have mga digital na yung mga repositories of our thesis and dissertations. We have digital access to journals, no, and that's for the academic community. And sila naman din yung gumagawa ng scientific research, no? So in terms of knowledge creation, sila yung audience talaga natin. But if we want to reach, again, based on the discussion, if we want to reach the wider, the popular audience, no, the general public, no, then we also have to have efforts in terms of the academe appearing in media, for example, or using media access to reach these people. Kasi totoo nga, no, parang baka masyadong ivory tower at hindi naman tayo nakakarating sa communities din. But in terms of knowledge creation, medyo nandun na tayo. No? We're distributing knowledge to those who are supposed to be building on theories and knowledge. So the digital society is helping. Sige. Right. Okay, I think maganda. 5 o'clock na crisp time. No, I want to thank again our speakers and including myself, no, for an enlightening. Ang weird kasi kasama ko sa mga speakers, no, but an enlightening session. So I do hope that we have inspired, no, a community of media, history and political science and ethnography and anthropology researchers, no. Let me just announce to everyone, no, that our next masterclass webinar. Entitled, why am I echoing? Okay, no more. Entitled Literature Review as an Exercise in Indigenizing Research will be on September 21 from 3 to 5 p.m. Same same day as Wednesday at 3 to 5. It will feature Dr. Elizabeth Enriquez, Dr. Evely Serrano, and Dr. Julien Tessa Y. Baldo Cubelo. So please visit our PACMRI PAC-MRI Facebook page for details. Again, thank you for spending this early afternoon to late afternoon with us. Please help us improve our webinars by accomplishing our evaluation form. And I hope someone will post it there. Kat already posted the link to our evaluation form. Certificates will be issued to participants who complete the evaluation form on or before 11:59, no, exacto, before midnight tonight, September 7, 2022. Mabuhay at padayon sa ating lahat. See you on September 7, no, as we move on to our next masterclass in mentoring webinar series. Maraming salamat, everyone.